Do you ever wonder if the way we show love today is really all that new? Does it shock you to think that some of our most cherished romantic traditions might have roots in a time shrouded in tales of knights and castles? Get ready to step back into the Middle Ages from the 5th to the 15th century and uncover the surprising origins of 10 practices that still shape our ideas of romance. Number 10. Wearing a lover's favors or colors. In the vibrant world of medieval chivalry, a knight's armor was not just a shield against blows. It was a canvas for personal expression and a declaration of loyalty, often of the romantic kind. One of the most visually striking and deeply symbolic practices was the wearing of a lady's favor or her chosen colors into battle, or more commonly into the arena of a tournament. This was not a casual fashion statement. It was a profound public commitment. A bold proclamation for all to see. When a knight prepared for a joust or a melee, his focus was absolute. He honed his skills, ensured his horse was swift, and his armor gleamed. Yet, a crucial part of this preparation often involved a small personal ritual. Receiving a token from the lady he admired, or the lady who had chosen him as her champion. This token could be a variety of things, each imbued with its own significance. A delicate silk scarf, perhaps embroidered with her initial, or a small personal device, might be tied around his arm, sleeve, or helmet. A ribbon plucked from her hair or gown could be fastened to his lance, or even woven into the mane of his warhorse. Sometimes it was a more substantial item, like a lady's sleeve detached from her dress and proudly displayed. Color of these favors was also important, as medieval society placed great emphasis on color symbolism. Red might signify passion or courage, blue fidelity, and green new love or hope. By accepting and displaying such a favor, the knight openly acknowledged his devotion to the lady and her inspiring presence. The act of wearing a favor was steeped in the ideals of courtly love, where the knight served his lady with unwavering dedication. Often from afar and with little hope of physical consummation, her beauty and virtue were meant to inspire him to greater deeds of valor and honor. When he entered the lists, a lady's favor served as a constant reminder of his purpose and the high standards he was expected to uphold. It was a tangible link between the battlefield and the bower, between martial prowess and tender affection. Historical accounts from the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly those describing chivalric romances and real-life tournaments, frequently mentioned this practice. Chroniclers would detail the lavishness of the tournament, the skill of the knights, and the visible tokens of affection they bore. The lady in turn also played a vital role in this tradition. Her decision to bestow a favor was not made lightly. It was a mark of her esteem, her trust, and sometimes her unspoken affection. She might present the favor to her chosen knight with a formal gesture before the assembled crowd, or perhaps in a more private, yet still observed, moment. Her presence at the tournament was almost as important as the knight's. From her vantage point in the stands, adorned in her finest attire, she would watch her champion, her heart swelling with pride or apprehension. The knight's performance in the lists was not just for his own honor or the glory of his lord. It was also, perhaps primarily, for the lady whose favor he wore. A strong showing, a decisive victory, or an act of extraordinary courage would bring honor not only to himself, but also to the lady who had inspired him. Scholars of medieval history point to numerous examples in literature and historical records where a knight's actions were directly tied to the favor he wore. In the epic poems and chansons de geste, knights frequently undertake perilous quests or face formidable opponents, with their ladies' colors fluttering from their helmet or lance. This tradition underscored the deep connection between love and martial achievement in the medieval imagination. A knight's bravery was often seen as a direct reflection of the love he bore for his lady, and her favor was the visible proof of that inspiring bond. If a knight performed poorly or worse, showed cowardice, it could be seen as a dishonor not only to himself, but also to the lady whose favor he represented. Conversely, a knight who fought with exceptional skill and courage, even in defeat, brought glory to his lady. The ritual of wearing a favor was not limited to the grand spectacle of tournaments. Sometimes a lady might give a smaller, more intimate token for a knight to carry with him on a longer journey or into a proper war: a small ribbon, a piece of embroidery, or even a lock of her hair placed discreetly within a locket or sewn into his garment would serve as a constant reminder of her presence and her hopes for his safe return. This more private form of the tradition carried the same weight of sentiment and commitment. Though it lacked the public display of the tournament favor, these hidden tokens often served as a source of comfort and strength during arduous campaigns, reminding the knight of what awaited him at home and the love he fought to protect. The symbolic power of wearing a lover's favor extended beyond the battlefield. It reinforced the social order and the ideals of chivalry that permeated medieval aristocratic society. It highlighted the role of women as objects of veneration, even if their practical power was often limited. It created a visible language of love and loyalty that everyone at court or at a tournament could understand. Practice served as a powerful emotional engine, driving knights to ever greater feats of daring and encouraging a certain code of conduct that emphasized honor, courtesy, and service. It was a tradition that wove together the threads of romance, martial valor, and social spectacle into a rich tapestry of medieval life. The echoes of this tradition can still be seen today in less formal ways, such as a sports fan wearing the colors of their favorite team or a participant in a race wearing a specific ribbon for a cause, though without the same romantic undertones. Number 9. Elopement and secret marriages. While the romantic ideal of the Middle Ages often focused on grand gestures and public declarations of love, the reality of medieval marriage was often far more pragmatic, driven by alliances, property. Marriages were frequently arranged by families, sometimes when the prospective bride and groom were still children, with little regard for personal affection. Yet, despite the rigid societal structures and the authority of parents and lords, the human heart often found its own way, leading to the surprisingly common, if often perilous, tradition of elopement and secret marriages. These were not the whimsical decisions of love-struck teenagers. They were often desperate acts with serious consequences. The motivations for a secret marriage or an elopement were varied, but they almost always stemmed from an insurmountable obstacle to a conventional union. Perhaps the families were locked in a bitter feud, or one party was considered too low in social standing for the other. Financial disparities were also a frequent barrier. A wealthy heiress might be promised to a powerful lord, while her heart belonged to a landless knight. Sometimes the issue was a previous engagement that the lovers wished to break, or even a desire to avoid a forced religious life. The church, while powerful also, had its own rules, and certain degrees of kinship could prevent a marriage forcing lovers to seek a clandestine union. The very concept of consent, while acknowledged by the church, was often overridden by parental authority and practice, pushing young people to extreme measures. A secret marriage, often referred to as a clandestine marriage, was one performed without the public announcement of banns or the presence of the community, usually at an unusual time or location. While the church increasingly favored public marriages after the 12th century for validity, the presence of a priest and the mutual consent of the couple were often considered sufficient. This meant that a simple exchange of vows, followed by cohabitation, could be considered a valid marriage in the eyes of God, even if it was not legally or socially recognized by the families involved. Historical legal records and church documents from various regions of medieval Europe reveal a continuous struggle by authorities to regulate these secret unions precisely because they were so difficult to undo and often led to property disputes and social disorder. Elopement, on the other hand, involved the physical act of running away. This was a far more dangerous undertaking, especially for the woman. A lady who eloped risked not only her reputation, but also her inheritance and her future security. If caught, she could be forced into a hated marriage, sent to a convent, or even disinherited. 4. The man elopement carried the risk of retaliation from the woman's family, who might accuse him of abduction. A serious crime. Despite these grave dangers, the allure of marrying for love or simply escaping an intolerable arranged future proved powerful enough to prompt countless desperate acts. Ballads and folk tales from the Middle Ages often romanticize these escapes, depicting brave knights rescuing their beloved from tyrannical parents or cruel guardians, but the reality was likely far grittier. The process of a secret marriage typically involved finding a sympathetic priest who is willing to perform the ceremony away from prying eyes, perhaps in a remote chapel, a private chamber, or even in a field. Witnesses were often minimal, sometimes just one or two trusted friends or servants. The vows themselves were simple: a mutual declaration of intent to marry and to live together as husband and wife. The exchange of rings or other tokens might follow. The critical element was the free and open consent of both parties. Once these vows were exchanged and cohabitation began, the church generally considered the couple married, regardless of whether their families approved or even knew. This created a loophole in the system that many exploited. One of the most famous, albeit fictionalized, examples of a secret marriage that highlights the tension between familial duty and personal desire comes from the story of Abelard and Heloise in the 12th century. Their intellectual and passionate love affair led to a secret marriage which was later discovered with tragic consequences. While their story is unique in its intellectual depth, it illustrates the very real risks involved when individuals defied societal norms and familial expectations for the sake of love. Real historical accounts, particularly from legal archives, are filled with cases of disputed marriages where a couple claimed to have married in secret, often years before, leading to complex legal battles over legitimacy and inheritance. The aftermath of a secret marriage or elopement was rarely simple. If the marriage was discovered, the families involved might react with fury. Reconciliation was possible, especially if the couple proved themselves steadfast, and if the family could be persuaded of the union's validity. Sometimes the parents would grudgingly accept the marriage, particularly if children were born, as this provided an heir. Other times the couple would be ostracized, disinherited, or even persecuted. Consequences could range from social disgrace to outright violence. For women especially, their vulnerability was immense, as their status and protection largely depended on their family or a recognized husband. Despite the inherent risks and the constant pressure from societal norms, the desire for agency in one's own life and love remained a potent force. The tradition of secret marriages and elopements highlights a persistent undercurrent of individual will against the backdrop of medieval society strictures. Demonstrates that even in an era of arranged marriages and patriarchal control, the longing for a chosen partner, for love on one's own terms, was a powerful motivator that sometimes, against all odds, found a way to flourish, albeit in the shadow. These stories, whether historical accounts or romanticized tales, remind us that the struggle for love and personal choice is not a modern invention, but a timeless human endeavor. Number 8. Feasts and celebrations of love. Proto-Valentine's Day. The Middle Ages, often imagined as a somber period, was also a time of rich communal life and vibrant celebration. Amidst the daily grind of survival and the strictures of social hierarchy, there were specific times set aside for festivity, and some of these gradually evolved into occasions with distinct romantic undertones. While not a direct precursor to modern Valentine's Day in name or explicit commercialization, certain medieval feasts fostered an atmosphere conducive to courtship, the pairing of lovers, and the celebration of affection. These gatherings were not just about food and drink. They were social canvases where connections were forged, alliances subtly hinted at, and romantic inclinations gently nurtured. One of the most significant periods for such romantic festivities was the springtime, particularly around the beginning of May. May Day celebrations, rooted in ancient pagan fertility rites, were widely observed across Europe. These festivities marked the arrival of spring, the burgeoning of life, and the renewal of nature. Young people especially would participate in maypole dances, gather wildflowers, and spend time outdoors. The joyous atmosphere, coupled with the symbolism of new beginnings and blossoming flora, naturally lent itself to courtship and the formation of romantic pairs. Historical accounts from the 14th and 15th centuries describe young men and women going a-maying, picking flowers and greens, and engaging in games and dances that encouraged interaction and playful flirtation. These were often chaperoned affairs, but the sheer joy and freedom of the occasion allowed for a loosening of usual social restraints. Another important day, though its romantic association solidified more distinctly in later medieval centuries, was St. Valentine's Day. While its precise origins are debated by the 14th century, the figure of Saint Valentine had become linked with lovers in parts of Europe, particularly England and France. This connection is often attributed to the widespread belief that birds began to mate on this specific day, February 14th. The English poet Geoffrey Chaucer is often cited as a key figure in popularizing this association. In his poem Parlement of Fools, written around 1382, he explicitly links St. Valentine's Day with the mating season of birds and the choosing of mates. This poetic connection, while not necessarily creating the tradition, certainly cemented it in the popular imagination of the time. Feasts associated with the courtly love tradition also provided fertile ground for romantic expressions. Grand banquets and gatherings at the courts of nobles were opportunities for knights and ladies to interact in a refined setting. While courtly love often remained unconsummated and highly stylized, these events provided the arena for its display. Knights might offer compliments to their ladies, recite poetry, or engage in courtly games designed to test wit and charm. The atmosphere of chivalry and idealized love permeated these gatherings, encouraging a certain decorum and romantic playfulness. The music, the lavish food, and the beautiful clothing all contributed to an environment where romance could subtly bloom. Beyond specific dates, any major feast day, whether religious or secular, offered a break from routine and an opportunity for social interaction. Christmas, Easter, and harvest festivals were all times when communities would gather, often bringing together people from different villages or estates. During these celebrations, dances, songs, and communal games were common. These activities naturally led to mixing between the sexes, providing opportunities for young men and women to meet, converse, and develop affections. While the primary purpose of such feasts was often religious observance or communal solidarity, the incidental effect was often the fostering of romantic relationships. Village records and local chronicles sometimes refer to these gatherings as places where young couples first met or where courtships progressed. The social dynamics at these feasts were carefully managed, especially for the nobility. While there was more freedom for the common folk, noblewomen were always chaperoned and interactions were governed by strict rules of etiquette. Yet within these boundaries, subtle forms of communication and flirtation were possible. A lingering gaze, a shared laugh, a whispered word, or the giving of a small symbolic gift could convey romantic interest. The very act of dancing, especially the courtly dances of the later Middle Ages, offered a structured yet intimate way for men and women to interact physically within socially acceptable limits. The shared rhythm and movement could create a fleeting connection. The tradition of drawing lots or choosing partners was also present at some medieval festivities, particularly around February 14. This involved individuals drawing names perhaps from a hat to select a valentine or a partner for a day of feasting and entertainment. This practice, though lighthearted, served to formally pair individuals, even if only for the duration of the celebration, and could sometimes spark genuine interest. Literary references, such as those found in the Paston Letters, a collection of correspondence from a prominent English family in the 15th century, offer glimpses into these customs, showing that young people sometimes as a part of their social lives. These medieval feasts and celebrations of love, while different from our modern conception of Valentine's Day, show a clear lineage of human desire to set aside special times for romance, courtship, and the expression of affection. There were moments when the strictures of daily life could be loosened, allowing for joy, connection, and the blossoming of love. Combination of natural cycles, religious observances, and evolving social customs created a rich tapestry of romantic traditions that shaped how medieval people sought and celebrated love, proving that the human heart's inclination for festivity and connection is truly timeless. Number 7. Love letters and secret communication. In a world before instant messaging, email, or even widely available printed books, the act of sending and receiving a love letter in the Middle Ages was a grand gesture. Fraught with both peril and possibility, literacy was not universal, paper was expensive, and travel was slow and dangerous. Yet, despite these formidable challenges, the desire to communicate deep affection, yearning, and secret passions spurred the development of intricate systems of love letters and clandestine messages. These weren't just notes, they were carefully crafted works, often poetic, sometimes coded, and always precious. For much of the early and high Middle Ages, literacy was largely confined to the clergy and a select few among the nobility. However, by the late Middle Ages, particularly from the 13th century onwards, literacy began to spread, especially within the aristocratic and burgeoning merchant classes. This gradual increase in the ability to read and write was a crucial factor in the rise of written romantic communication. A knight, for instance, might learn to read and write as part of his courtly education, enabling him to compose verses for his lady. Ladies, particularly those of high birth, were often educated in reading and writing, not only for managing estates but also for their spiritual lives. For engaging with courtly literates, the creation of a love letter was no small feat. The writing material itself, usually parchment made from animal skin, was costly and required careful preparation. Ink was made from natural pigments, and quills from goose feathers were the primary writing tools. The process was slow and deliberate. Content of the letters often drew heavily on the conventions of courtly love literature, expressing fervent devotion, humble service, and often a sense of longing and unattainable desire. They might contain elaborate poetic verses, allegorical references, or flowery prose, all designed to convey the depth of the sender's feelings while adhering to the expected forms of polite address. Common theme was the plaint, where the lover bemoaned the cruelty of his lady or the suffering caused by her distance. Delivery was perhaps the most challenging aspect. There was no postal service as we know it. Messengers were employed, often trusted squires, servants, or even wandering minstrels and peddlers who might travel between castles and towns. The messenger's loyalty was paramount, as the discovery of a secret love letter could have severe repercussions, particularly if the love was illicit or went against family wishes. A messenger might have to travel for days or weeks, facing the dangers of the road, including bandits or rival factions. The sheer effort involved in sending and receiving such a letter underscored the sincerity and intensity of the feelings behind it. The need for secrecy often led to ingenious methods of communication. Letters might be hidden within other innocuous documents or stitched into the lining of clothing. Sometimes, messages were conveyed orally by a trusted intermediary who memorized the words. Symbolic objects could also carry messages: a flower with a particular meaning, a piece of embroidery, or a ring. These tokens could serve as a confirmation of a secret message or a symbol of affection too risky to put into words. Codes and ciphers were also used, though often simple ones, to obscure the content from prying eyes. The use of cryptic language, double meanings, and allegories was also common, allowing the sender to convey deep emotion while maintaining plausible deniability. If the letter fell into the wrong hands, the risks associated with love letters were considerable. If intercepted by a suspicious husband, a disapproving father, or a jealous rival, the consequences could be dire. For the sender, it could mean social disgrace, imprisonment, or even physical violence. For the recipient, especially a woman, the discovery of such a letter could lead to forced seclusion, a broken engagement, or a damaged reputation, which was paramount to medieval society. Despite these dangers, the thrill of clandestine communication and the profound desire to connect with a beloved proved to be a powerful motivator. Historical archives and medieval literary collections contain fascinating examples of these letters. The Paston Letters, a collection of family correspondence from 15th century England, includes several letters that show the tender affections between spouses, not just formal business. While not strictly love letters in the modern sense, they reveal personal feelings and anxieties. More overtly romantic examples can be found in collections of poetry and songs, often transcribed from oral traditions, which would have circulated among the literate elite. These poetic forms often served as stand-ins for actual letters or provided templates for their composition. The tradition of love letters in the Middle Ages was more than just a means of communication. It was an art form, a testament to enduring human emotion, and a daring act of defiance against societal constraints. It highlighted the power of written words to convey feelings across distances and time, and the profound longing for connection in an era where such connections were often difficult to forge and even harder to maintain. The effort, the risk, and the sheer beauty of these medieval love letters speak volumes about the human heart's enduring quest for expression and intimacy. Number 6. The symbolism of flowers and herbs. Long before a dozen red roses became the ubiquitous symbol of love, medieval people embraced a sophisticated and intricate language of flowers and herbs. This practice was not merely about aesthetic appreciation. It was a profound system of communication, where each bloom, leaf, or sprig carried a specific meaning, allowing lovers to express sentiments that might otherwise be too risky, too subtle, or too profound to speak aloud. This tradition was deeply intertwined with folklore, medicine, religion, and the evolving ideals of courtly love, making the simple act of giving a bouquet a layered and meaningful gesture. The meaning attributed to different plants often stemmed from a combination of factors: their appearance, their natural properties, their medicinal uses, ancient myths, and Christian symbolism. For example, the rose, even then, was a powerful symbol, but its specific meaning could vary. A red rose generally signified passionate love and desire, while a white rose often represented purity, innocence, or spiritual love. A rosebud might signify nascent love, and a full bloom, mature affection. The thorn, of course, added a layer of complexity, reminding of the pains and trials of love. Roses were frequently depicted in medieval art, poetry, and illuminated manuscripts, often in gardens which were themselves symbolic spaces of love and earthly paradise. Lilies, particularly the white lily, were strongly associated with purity, chastity, and the Virgin Mary, making them suitable for expressing reverence or a more spiritual form of affection. Violets, with their humble appearance and sweet fragrance, could symbolize modesty, faithfulness, and tender affection. Pansies, from the French pensée, meaning thought, conveyed remembrance or thoughtfulness. Forget-me-nots, though their name became more common in later centuries, embodied enduring remembrance and true love. These were not just randomly chosen flowers. Each had a recognized place in the complex tapestry of medieval botanical symbolism. Herbs, too, held significant symbolic weight. Rosemary, known for its enduring fragrance, was often associated with remembrance and fidelity. It might be woven into garlands for weddings or given as a token of enduring love. Myrtle, sacred to Venus in classical mythology, represented love and marriage. Rue, often called the herb of grace, could signify regret or repentance, or sometimes purity. Sage, known for its wisdom, could imply respect and admiration. These herbs were often cultivated in castle gardens, which were not just practical spaces for food and medicine, but also symbolic landscapes where lovers might meet and exchange tokens. The way these flowers and herbs were given also conveyed meaning. A simple sprig tucked into a garment could be a secret message. A carefully arranged bouquet, often called a nosegay or tussie-mussy, would be meticulously crafted to tell a story or convey a complex sentiment. The choice of flowers, their arrangement, and the accompanying gesture all contributed to the message. For instance, a lover might present a mix of red roses for passion, violets for modesty, and rosemary for remembrance, effectively composing a silent poem of affection. This floral language was not merely a romantic tool, it permeated various aspects of medieval life. It was present in heraldry, where specific flowers might be incorporated into coats of arms to convey family traits or allegiances. It appeared in religious art, where saints were often identified by the flowers associated with them. It was used in folklore and superstitions, where certain plants were believed to possess magical properties related to love, fertility, or protection. The language of flowers was part of a broader cultural understanding that ascribed symbolic meaning to the natural world. The tradition of gifting flowers and herbs as romantic tokens gained particular prominence within the context of courtly love. A knight might present his lady with a bouquet as a sign of his devotion and service, often as part of a formal exchange at court. The lady in turn might wear a specific flower in her hair or on her dress as a subtle acknowledgement of her favor. These exchanges were public yet personal, understood by those within the courtly circle. Minstrels and troubadours would often allude to these floral symbols in their songs and poems, further solidifying their meanings in the collective consciousness. Scholars of medieval botany and cultural history have meticulously documented these symbolic meanings, often drawing from Herbel's illuminated manuscripts and literary works of the period. These sources reveal a consistency in the attribution of meaning to plants across different regions, though some local variations certainly existed. The persistence of certain floral symbols, like the red rose for love, from the Middle Ages to today, speaks to the enduring power and universality of this silent, fragrant language. It allowed medieval lovers to express the deepest emotions with elegance and discretion, weaving nature's beauty into the intricate dance of romance. Number 5. Hand-fasting and betrothal rituals. Long before church weddings became the universally mandated standard, the medieval world recognized and practiced a variety of betrothal rituals and customs, often culminating in a form of provisional marriage known as hand-fasting. These traditions were crucial steps in forming a legitimate union, marking a period of formal commitment before a full, often more public marriage ceremony. They were deeply rooted in local customs, legal traditions, and evolving church doctrine, serving as a public declaration of intent and a binding agreement between families. At the heart of betrothal was the concept of espousal, or promise to marry. This was not a casual engagement. It was a serious, legally binding contract, even if it did not involve immediate cohabitation. The Church gradually asserted its influence over marriage, but for much of the Middle Ages, the consent of the parties, sometimes without parental approval, was theoretically sufficient for a valid marriage in the eyes of God, if not always in the eyes of the law or family. However, formal betrothals usually involved families, and often included property negotiations and agreements. One of the most visually striking aspects of betrothal was the exchange of tokens. The most common token was a ring, often placed on the fourth finger of the left hand, believed to contain a vein directly connected to the heart. The ring symbolized eternity and the unbreakable nature of the promise. Other tokens might include a piece of jewelry, a ribbon, or a coin broken in half, with each party keeping one piece. These tokens served as tangible proof of the spoken vows and as a constant reminder of the commitment made. Legal records and literary accounts from the period frequently mention these exchanges as proof of a betrothal agreement. Hand fasting was a specific and significant ritual within the broader concept of betrothal. It involved the symbolic binding of the couple's hands, often with a strip of cloth or rope. While they exchanged vows, this ritual, particularly common in parts of Scotland, Ireland, and some areas of England, was a public declaration of a trial marriage or a temporary marriage, often for a year and a day. During this period, the couple would live together as husband and wife. If, after the specified time, the union proved fruitful and harmonious, a more formal, permanent marriage ceremony would follow, often with the full blessing of the church. If not, they could part ways without the stigma of divorce, though any children born during the hand fasting period were considered legitimate. The witnesses to a hand fasting or betrothal were crucial. Their presence ensured the public acknowledgement and legitimacy of the agreement. For commoners, this might involve neighbors and fellow villagers. For the nobility, it could be other lords, ladies, and important household members. These witnesses could later attest to the vows made, which was particularly important in an era when written records were not always universally kept or trusted. The vows themselves were often simple, a clear declaration of intent. I take you as my wife, husband. The legal standing of betrothals and hand fasting varied across regions and centuries. The church concerned with regulating marriage and ensuring its sanctity increasingly pushed for formal church ceremonies. Council of Trent in the 16th century, for example, finally formalized the requirement for a public marriage ceremony performed by a priest. However, for centuries before that, local customs often held sway, and the concept of spousals by word of present consent, where a couple declared themselves married with intent to live together as such, was considered a valid, if informal, marriage. The period between betrothal and the final marriage ceremony could be quite long, particularly for high-ranking families where complex dowry negotiations or political alliances needed to be finalized. During this time, the betrothed couple was expected to maintain a certain level of propriety, though they were often allowed more freedom to interact than unbetrothed individuals. In some traditions, particularly among the common folk, the betrothal itself might be considered the real marriage, with the church ceremony being a later blessing or formality. The practice of hand fasting and betrothal rituals highlights the fluidity and diversity of medieval marriage customs. It shows a society grappling with the balance between familial control, individual consent, and the evolving role of the church. These traditions were not just dry legal agreements. They were often emotional moments, public declarations of love and commitment, even if those emotions were entwined with practical considerations of status and property. They laid the groundwork for modern engagement practices and reveal a historical pathway to the public commitment of love that continues today, albeit in different forms. Number 4. Public declarations of affection, tournaments, jousts. The Middle Ages were not just about clandestine whispers and secret tokens. They were also a time of grand spectacle, especially when it came to chivalry and romance. Tournament, particularly the joust, evolved into a powerful arena for public declarations of affection, where a knight's prowess was intertwined with his devotion to a lady. These events were far more than mere athletic contests. They were elaborate social rituals, theatrical performances, and vivid displays of both martial skill and romantic loyalty, often serving as a highly visible stage for courtly love. Tournaments, which began as mock battles to train knights for warfare, gradually transformed into elaborate pageants by the High and Late Middle Ages. They drew large crowds from kings and queens to common villagers, all eager to witness the thrilling clashes of armored knights. The ladies of the court, dressed in their finest attire, held a prominent place, often seated in specially constructed grandstands. Their presence was not just for entertainment. They were the muses, the inspirations, and often the judges of the knight's performance. For a knight entering a tournament was an opportunity to display his courage, strength, and skill, but it was also crucially a chance to win honor and admiration in the eyes of a specific lady. This was where public declarations of affection came into play. A knight might dedicate his performance to a lady, verbally announcing her name before a joust, or subtly by wearing her colors or a favor she had given him. This act was a public pledge of his service and devotion, often intended to win her favor or solidify an existing romantic bond. Cheers and applause of the crowd, along with the lady's approving gaze, served as powerful validation. The very structure of the joust encouraged this romantic display. Two knights armed with lances would thunder towards each other on horseback, aiming to unseat their opponent. A successful tilt splintering a lance on the opponent's shield or sending him sprawling from his saddle brought immense glory. This glory was then, by convention, often ascribed to the inspiring power of the lady the knight served. Ballads and chronicles from the period frequently described knights entering the lists with a specific lady's name on their lips or a piece of her apparel adorning their helm. Beyond the joust, other forms of public display were common. During the feasts and dances that often accompany tournaments, knights would engage in courtly dances with their chosen ladies, performing elaborate steps that tricot their grace and refinement. They might recite poetry in praise of their lady's beauty and virtue, or sing songs composed in her honor. These were not always private serenades. Sometimes they were performed for the assembled court, a public performance of devotion that added to the romantic atmosphere of the event. The role of the ladies was integral to this tradition. They were the arbiters of courtly behavior and the recipients of these grand gestures. A lady might acknowledge a knight's dedication with a smile, a nod, or a discreet wave of her hand. Sometimes a queen of love and beauty would be chosen at a tournament, a symbolic role that elevated a particular lady to a position of honor and allowed her to bestow prizes or even arbitrate disputes among the knights. Her presence and her reaction were paramount to the success of a knight's romantic display. The concept of proving one's love through deeds of valor was central to courtly love, and tournaments provided the ideal stage. A knight who fought valiantly, even if he did not win, demonstrated his worthiness and his dedication. His courage and skill were seen as extensions of his love. Conversely, a knight who showed cowardice or poor sportsmanship brought shame not only upon himself but also, by extension, upon the lady he claimed to serve. The stakes, both martial and romantic, were incredibly high. Historical texts, such as Jean Froissart's Chronicles, a comprehensive account of 14th century events in England and France, are filled with descriptions of tournaments where romantic rivalries and displays of affection were central. These narratives often highlight the specific ladies for whom knights fought and the elaborate ceremonies surrounding the giving and receiving of favors. The fictional romances of the period, like Chrétien de Troyes' Arthurian tales, further cemented these ideals in the popular imagination, showing knights undertaking perilous quests and winning glory in the name of their beloved ladies. The tradition of public declarations of affection through tournaments and jousts was a dazzling expression of medieval chivalry and romance. It fused the martial and the amorous, creating a spectacle where honor, skill, and passionate devotion were showcased before an appreciative audience. It allowed for dramatic, visible articulation of love in a society that often valued discretion, proving that some forms of romance thrive best in the spotlight. Number 3. Serenades and love songs. The air of medieval castles and towns was often filled with music, and much of that music carried themes of love. The tradition of serenades and love songs was a cornerstone of medieval courtship, providing a powerful, emotive, and often public way to express deep affection, longing, and devotion. This was the domain of the troubadours, quatrains, and minnesingers, traveling poets and musicians who an art form, influencing the expression of love across social strata. The troubadours, originating in southern France, Aquitania, in the 11th century, were perhaps the earliest and most influential exponents of this tradition. They were poets who composed and often performed their own lyrical verses, typically accompanied by a lute, harp, or vielle, a stringed instrument similar to a fiddle. Their songs, known as cansos, were primarily focused on fin amour, or courtly love, an idealized, often unrequited form of devotion to a noble lady. These songs detailed the lover's suffering, his humble service, the lady's beauty, and the profound, often spiritual impact she had on his life. A serenade was a specific type of love song performed in the evening, often beneath the window of the beloved. This was a bold and public declaration intended to catch the lady's attention and announce the singer's devotion to anyone within earshot. The content of these serenades varied from heartfelt pleas and lamentations to declarations of unwavering loyalty. The very act of a nobleman or knight taking up an instrument and singing for his lady was a testament to his passion, as it went against the martial expectations of his social class. However, the influence of courtly love made such artistic expressions admirable. As the traditions spread across Europe, it evolved. In northern France, they were called quatrains, and in Germany, minnesingers. While their themes often mirrored those of the troubadours, local styles and languages added their own unique flavor. The minnesingers, for instance, often incorporated more elements of spiritual and moral instruction into their love songs, reflecting the more conservative German courtly ideals. Regardless of regional variation, the core function remained: to use music and poetry to articulate the complexities of love. The lyrics of these love songs were often intricate and highly metaphorical. They spoke of the lady as a guiding star, a source of light, or a cruel mistress whose gaze held the power to grant life or condemn to despair. They frequently use allegorical figures like love, amour, or courtesy, courtesia, as characters in their narratives. The language was refined, focusing on virtues, honor, and beauty, rather than explicit physical desire. This poetic language served to elevate love to a higher, almost sacred plane, fitting the ideals of courtly love. The social impact of these songs was immense. They shaped the understanding of love and romance in medieval society, particularly among the elite. Knights learned how to express their feelings in a refined and acceptable manner, while ladies were given a new standard of admiration and veneration. The songs created a shared cultural vocabulary for discussing and experiencing love, even if the real-life applications were often more complex than the idealized verses. They provided both entertainment and instruction in the art of sophisticated courtship. Performance was key. Troubadours and minstrels were skilled performers, capable of captivating an audience with their voices, instruments, and storytelling abilities. They would travel from court to court, sharing new songs and popularizing existing ones. This oral tradition meant that love songs spread widely, becoming a common feature of courtly gatherings, feasts, and private moments of contemplation. The melodies themselves were often flowing and melancholic, designed to evoke deep emotion. Many of these songs were eventually written down in chansonniers or songbooks, which provides us with invaluable insight into medieval musical and poetic traditions. These manuscripts, often beautifully illuminated, preserve the words and sometimes the notation of songs that once echoed through castle halls. They reveal the names of celebrated troubadours, like Bernard de Ventadorn, who composed hundreds of love songs, and countesses like Beatrice of Dia, one of the few female troubadours whose work survives, demonstrating that women also participated in this poetic tradition. The tradition of serenades and love songs was a profound expression of medieval romantic culture. It showed that love was not just a private emotion, but a subject worthy of public artistry and profound contemplation. It provided a refined and beautiful language for expressing the human heart's deepest desires, fears, and joys, leaving an enduring legacy that continues to influence our understanding of romantic expression. Number 2. Love tokens and rings. In the Middle Ages, long before mass-produced gifts, Personal tokens and rings held immense symbolic power in expressing love, commitment, and desire. These were not merely trinkets, they were tangible declarations, imbued with meaning and often exchanged as crucial steps in courtship, betrothal, or even as secret expressions of devotion. The giving and receiving of such items formed a rich tradition reflecting the depth of medieval affections and the cultural significance placed on material symbols. Rings, perhaps more than any other item, were central to romantic pledges. The practice of giving a ring as a sign of betrothal or marriage was deeply entrenched, echoing ancient customs and incorporating Christian symbolism. A ring with its unbroken circle represented eternity, fidelity, and the unending nature of the union. It was often worn on the fourth finger of the left hand, believed to be connected directly to the heart by the vena amoris, or vein of love. Early medieval rings were often simple, made of iron or silver, gradually becoming more elaborate with the use of gold, precious stones, and intricate designs in the later centuries. Many medieval rings featured inscriptions known as posy rings, from the word poesy or poem. These inscriptions, often on the inside of the band, conveyed short, heartfelt messages of love, loyalty, or commitment. Phrases like, "Love conquers all," "True love never ends," or "I love you as I live," were common. These private messages added an intimate layer to the public symbol, making the ring a deeply personal token shared between lovers. Choice of stone in a ring could also carry meaning: a ruby for passion, a sapphire for truth, or an emerald for hope and new beginnings. Beyond rings, a variety of other tokens were exchanged. These could be practical items, elevated by sentiment, or purely symbolic objects. Ribbons, often given by a lady to a knight, could be worn on his armor or clothing as a public declaration of her favor. Small pieces of embroidered cloth, perhaps a sleeve or a scarf, were also common, often bearing the lady's colors or personal device. These items served as constant reminders of the beloved, particularly when distance separated. The lover's hair was another potent symbol of love and devotion. Locks of hair intricately woven into rings, brooches, or lockets were exchanged as deeply personal and intimate tokens. This practice demonstrated a profound level of trust and affection. As hair was seen as a part of the person themselves, such items were often kept close to the body, a secret reminder of the beloved's presence. Jewelry, including brooches, pendants, and sometimes even belt buckles, could be inscribed with romantic motifs, initials, or small allegorical scenes depicting lovers. The exchange of tokens often occurred in specific contexts. In a betrothal ceremony, the ring was formally presented, often in the presence of witnesses. In the context of courtly love, a lady might bestow a favor upon a knight as a mark of her esteem and an inspiration for his chivalrous deeds. Sometimes tokens were exchanged secretly, particularly in clandestine relationships, or as a way to send a private message when direct communication was impossible or too risky. A small handcrafted item, perhaps a wooden carving, or a piece of engraved metal, might be passed discreetly. The value of these tokens was not always monetary. While wealthy nobles might exchange rings set with jewels, a commoner might give a hand-carved wooden heart or a carefully chosen flower. The significance lay in the act of giving, the personal thought put into the item, and the shared understanding of its meaning between the giver and the receiver. These tokens were physical representations of intangible emotions, binding people together through shared symbols. Historical records, archaeological finds, and literary sources provide ample evidence of these traditions. Excavations of medieval sites have unearthed rings, brooches, and pendants with romantic inscriptions or designs. Illuminated manuscripts often depict scenes of lovers exchanging tokens. Collections of medieval poetry and romantic tales frequently feature the giving of a ring or a favor as a pivotal moment in a courtship. These artifacts and narratives demonstrate the pervasive nature of these symbolic exchanges across different social classes The tradition of love tokens and rings in the Middle Ages reveals a society that deeply understood the power of objects to carry and convey emotion. These tangible symbols were not just pretty things. They were silent declarations of love, commitment, and belonging, weaving a rich tapestry of personal connection in a world that often valued broader social and political alliances. They remind us that the desire to wear a symbol of one's beloved is a deeply rooted human instinct, one that continues to resonate today. Number 1. Courtly love and its rules. Perhaps no romantic tradition defines the Middle Ages more profoundly than courtly love, or fin amour. Emerging in the aristocratic courts of Aquitaine, southern France. In the 11th and 12th centuries, this highly stylized and often paradoxical concept of love-shaped literature, music, and social behavior for centuries was not a simple, straightforward affection, but a complex, idealized system of emotional and spiritual devotion, often unconsummated and governed by an intricate set of unwritten rules. At its core, courtly love was an aristocratic ideal, primarily enacted within the feudal social structure. It often involved a knight or nobleman who pledged his unwavering devotion and service to a high-born lady, typically married to a powerful lord. This lady was generally of higher social standing than the knight, making the relationship inherently unequal, and often, by definition, unrequited in a physical sense. The very unattainability of the lady became a central theme as it spurred the lover to greater feats of chivalry and moral improvement. The rules of courtly love were never formally codified in a universal text, but they were widely understood through the circulating poetry of troubadours, the narratives of courtly romances, and the social practices within noble courts. However, one notable attempt to define them was d'amore, about love, a 12th century Latin treatise by Andreas Capellanus, Andrew the chaplain, sometimes called The Art of Courtly Love. This text, though controversial and possibly satirical in parts, outlined 31 rules for lovers. These rules emphasized secrecy, humility, loyalty, and the judging power of love. Key tenets of courtly love included humility of the lover. The knight would position himself as the lady's humble servant, perpetually seeking her favor and approval. He would perform valiant deeds, write poetry, or sing songs in her honor, all without expecting anything tangible in return, especially not sexual gratification. His reward was the lady's recognition and the moral improvement he achieved through his devotion. Adoration of the lady. The lady was typically idealized as a paragon of beauty, virtue, and grace. She was seen as a source of moral and spiritual inspiration, whose very existence purified and ennobled the lover. Her beauty was often described in minute, almost spiritual detail. Secrecy. The relationship being often illicit and potentially scandalous due to the lady's marital status was generally kept secret. This added an element of danger and excitement, making every stolen glance or whispered word intensely significant. Breaching this secrecy was a serious offense. Suffering as a mark of true love, the lover's unfulfilled longing, the pains of separation, and the torment of unrequited desire were considered noble and necessary aspects of courtly love. This suffering was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the depth and purity of his feelings. It was a form of refining fire, love as a source of virtue. Paradoxically, this often adulterous love was supposed to make the lover a better person. It inspired him to be more courageous, more generous, more courteous, and more honorable. His desire to be worthy of his lady's esteem drove him to embody the ideals of chivalry. The origins of courtly love are often traced to the aristocratic courts of Aquitaine, particularly influenced by figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, a powerful duchess and queen who fostered a vibrant cultural scene. Troubadours like Bernard de Ventadorn and Geoffrey Rudel were central to articulating these ideals in their lyrical poetry. Later, in northern France, the courtiers continued the tradition, and the themes permeated the popular Arthurian romances of Chrétien de Troyes, where knights like Lancelot often pursued impossible loves, notably his devotion to Queen Guinevere. While often unconsummated physically, courtly love was intensely emotional and psychological. Provided an outlet for romantic passion within a society that often dictated marriage for practical rather than emotional reasons. It allowed for a complex interplay of emotions, including longing, jealousy, hope, and despair, without necessarily disrupting the social order through illicit physical liaisons. This is why some scholars suggest it was more of an intellectual exercise or a refined game than a widespread practice of actual adultery. The legacy of courtly love is immense. It profoundly influenced Western concepts of romance, idealizing the beloved, emphasizing emotional depth over physical gratification, and linking love with personal refinement and moral growth. While the strict rules faded with the Middle Ages, the echoes of courtly love can still be seen in the emphasis on chivalry, respectful adoration, and the enduring power of unfulfilled longing in romantic narratives. It was a tradition that elevated love to an art form, forever changing how Western societies viewed and expressed matters of the heart.